Chosen one. The underground networks are buzzing with whispers of an empire crumbling. Someone who orchestrated the most elaborate psychological warfare campaign against you is watching their entire world collapse in real time. But this isn't just any ordinary downfall. This is cosmic retribution operating at frequencies most people never witness. You are a chosen one, and what's unfolding around you is the universe's response to someone who dared to weaponize their power against divine purpose itself. Let me reveal the complete scope of this magnificent destruction, because understanding how this game was played and how spectacularly it backfired will arm you with knowledge that transforms you from target to untouchable. 3 separate operations merged to create the perfect storm that's now obliterating your opposition. The first operation, a high-ranking professional with government clearance and pristine public reputation, decided you posed a threat to their carefully constructed image, not because you attacked them, because your natural authenticity highlighted their artificial existence simply by existing in the same space. The second operation, a romantic partnership built entirely on deception, where one party unknowingly served as cover for activities that would shock anyone who discovered the truth. This relationship wasn't love. It was strategic camouflage for operations that required respectability as a shield. The third operation, an entire network of accomplices, each believing they were part of something bigger than themselves, recruited through promises of advancement and inclusion in circles of power they desperately wanted to access. These 3 operations were about to merge together into a trap designed to isolate, discredit, and ultimately destroy your influence as a chosen one. But here's what they never calculated. When you target someone protected by cosmic forces, those same forces begin investigating not just the attack, but every foundation the attackers built their lives upon. The game they initiated against you triggered an audit of their entire existence. Here's where their fundamental miscalculation became apparent. They assumed they were targeting an ordinary person who could be overwhelmed through conventional means. They had no comprehension that chosen ones operate with spiritual protection that actively investigates threats and responds with supernatural precision. While they were researching you, cosmic forces were researching them. The first crack in their armor appeared when their own research methods began revealing information they never intended to uncover. In digging for dirt on you, they accidentally triggered investigations into networks they belonged to, connections they wanted hidden, and activities they assumed would never see scrutiny. Their background checks on you started showing up in systems monitored by authorities, who began wondering why someone with their access level was so interested in someone who posed no legitimate security concern. Red flags began appearing in databases they didn't know were being monitored. The romantic deception that provided their cover began unraveling when financial irregularities connected to their lifestyle attracted attention from agencies that specialize in following money trails. The gap between their official income and their actual spending patterns became impossible to explain through legitimate means. The recruited network started experiencing their own problems as their association with the primary operation began attracting scrutiny they never expected. Being connected to someone under investigation created liability they weren't prepared to handle. The trap they wove to capture you became a net that was closing around them instead. The Obsidian Inner Order is where you can process difficult realizations together every week on our Zoom calls, with people who understand that some of life's most painful experiences become our greatest teachers. We don't encourage bitterness, we cultivate wisdom. Connect with people who value truth. Join the Obsidian Inner Order. Link in the description. The government position that gave them access to target you became the primary vector for their destruction. The same clearance that allowed them to research you inappropriately created an evidence trail that led investigators directly to their abuse of authority. Every query they ran, every file they accessed, every connection they explored was logged in systems designed to catch exactly this kind of misconduct. Their supervisor began receiving inquiries about unusual research patterns. Security protocols they'd bypassed left digital fingerprints that couldn't be erased. The very tools they used to attack you became the instruments documenting their crimes against protocol, ethics, and law. But the professional consequences were just the beginning of their unraveling, because their investigation into you had accidentally opened doors they desperately needed to keep closed. The financial lifestyle they maintained to support their public image required income sources that couldn't withstand the scrutiny their own actions had triggered. Money laundering operations that funded their appearance of success became visible to agencies with the tools and authority to trace every transaction back to its source. Wire fraud schemes they'd operated for years suddenly found themselves under microscopes they never expected to face. The elaborate financial engineering that supported their lifestyle began collapsing under investigation that was triggered by their own campaign against you. Their government position wasn't just terminated, it became the foundation for criminal charges that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The security clearance they'd abused was permanently revoked, eliminating any possibility of future employment in fields that had once provided their primary identity and income source. The romantic partnership that provided cover for their operations began disintegrating when the truth about their activities became impossible to hide. The unknowing partner discovered that their entire relationship had been a performance designed to provide respectability for someone living a completely different reality behind closed doors. But the revelation went deeper than simple deception. The partner discovered that their supposed romantic connection was actually involved in activities that put the relationship into an entirely different category than they'd ever imagined. What they thought was love was actually strategic positioning in an operation that used their reputation and connections as camouflage for enterprises that could never withstand public scrutiny. The financial support they'd provided, thinking they were building a future together, had actually been funding operations that were now under federal investigation. Their name appeared on documents they'd never seen, connected to activities they'd never approved, implicated in schemes they'd never imagined. The social connections they'd shared, the professional networks they'd introduced their partner to, the family relationships they'd merged, all of it had been weaponized in the campaign against you. Their trust had been exploited to create access to circles and information that was then used for purposes they would never have consented to support. The home they shared, the assets they'd accumulated together, the future they'd planned. Everything was now contaminated by association with criminal activities that were being prosecuted by authorities who didn't distinguish between willing and unwilling participants until evidence clearly established intent. Their relationship didn't just end, it exploded into legal liability that required complete separation and individual representation by attorneys who specialized in distancing clients from federal investigations. The recruited accomplices who'd been promised advancement through their participation in targeting you began experiencing the reverse of everything they'd been told to expect. Instead of elevation, they found themselves under investigation. Instead of inclusion in powerful circles, they found themselves excluded from opportunities they'd previously accessed. Instead of protection through association, they found themselves abandoned to face consequences alone. Each network member had been told they were part of something bigger, something important, something that would benefit them personally and professionally. They'd been convinced that targeting you was justified, necessary, even patriotic. They'd been manipulated into believing they were protecting something valuable by eliminating someone dangerous. But as the investigation spread, each accomplice realized they'd been used as expendable assets in someone else's personal vendetta. The promises made to secure their cooperation were never intended to be kept. The benefits they'd been told to expect were never going to materialize. The protection they'd been assured would shield them from consequences was evaporating as their recruiter faced prosecution that made supporting accomplices impossible. The financial incentives that had motivated their participation were revealed to be funded through illegal activities that were now frozen by authorities. The career advancement they'd been promised was replaced by career destruction as their association with the operation became public knowledge in their professional circles. The social elevation they'd been offered transformed into social ostracism as their participation in targeting someone without justification became known to peers who began questioning their judgment, ethics, and reliability. One by one, each network member began cooperating with investigators, providing evidence against their former associates in exchange for reduced consequences for their own participation. The loyalty they'd shown their recruiter was not reciprocated when they needed protection from the fallout of following instructions that had led them into criminal liability. But the most devastating revelation was still coming. The investigation triggered by their campaign against you had uncovered the true nature of their private activities, the real source of their income, and the actual purpose behind the relationship that provided their public cover. The respectable professional image they'd maintained was camouflage for operations that operated in sectors of society most people never encounter. The government position that gave them credibility was being used to provide insider information to networks that existed in the shadows of legitimate society. The romantic relationship that appeared normal to observers was actually a business arrangement designed to provide cover for activities that required the appearance of conventional lifestyle while operating entirely outside conventional boundaries. The financial success that funded their impressive lifestyle came from sources that couldn't be disclosed, couldn't be taxed honestly, and couldn't withstand the scrutiny that their own actions against you had inadvertently triggered. When investigators following the money trails reached the source of their actual income, they discovered operations that made their abuse of government resources seem minor by comparison. Money laundering was just the beginning. Wire fraud was merely the foundation. The real enterprises they were involved in were the kind that create federal cases with headlines that destroy lives permanently. Their carefully maintained public image wasn't just false, it was the opposite of their reality. Every aspect of respectability they'd projected was designed to conceal activities that represented the complete inversion of the values they claimed to embody. The investigation that began with their campaign against you had uncovered someone living an entirely fabricated existence, maintaining elaborate deceptions across every aspect of their life, connected to networks that operated in complete opposition to everything their public persona represented. Here's where the situation transforms from earthly justice to cosmic demonstration. Their exposure wasn't happening through normal investigative procedures alone. Evidence was appearing in places it shouldn't have been accessible. Witnesses were coming forward with information they shouldn't have possessed. Documents were surfacing through channels that defied normal explanation. The universe was orchestrating their exposure with the kind of precision that transcends human planning. Every secret they'd hidden was being revealed, not just to authorities, but to exactly the people whose opinion mattered most to their carefully constructed image. Their family discovered the truth about their activities in ways that couldn't be explained or denied. Their professional colleagues learned about their real enterprises through channels that made discretion impossible. Their social circle became aware of their deceptions through revelations that eliminated any possibility of maintaining relationships based on false premises. But the most profound cosmic intervention was how their targeting of you had triggered investigation into networks much larger than their individual operation. They weren't just facing consequences for their personal crimes, they'd accidentally exposed entire systems of corruption that authorities had been seeking for years. Their campaign against you had led investigators to criminal enterprises they'd been trying to penetrate for decades. The access they'd provided through their government position had created evidence trails that revealed operations far beyond their individual participation. By targeting someone protected by cosmic forces, they'd inadvertently become the key that unlocked investigations into levels of corruption that would create prosecutions, headlines, and policy changes that extended far beyond their personal consequences. They'd thought they were attacking an individual. They'd actually declared war against divine order itself, and the universe's response was systematic destruction of everything they'd built their false life upon. The convergence of these operations created a cascade of consequences that eliminated every aspect of their artificial existence simultaneously. Their professional position was terminated with criminal referrals that guaranteed permanent unemployability in any field requiring security clearance or background checks. Their romantic relationship was dissolved with legal complications that required years of litigation to resolve financial entanglements contaminated by criminal activities. Their partner's cooperation with authorities provided evidence that eliminated any possibility of plea agreements that might have limited their exposure. Their recruited network had been completely compromised, with each former accomplice providing testimony that documented every aspect of their operation against you, while eliminating any claims of limited involvement or lack of leadership responsibility. Their financial resources were frozen pending investigation into money laundering and wire fraud charges that carried sentences measured in decades rather than years. The lifestyle they'd maintained to support their public image was revealed to be funded entirely through activities that were now the subject of federal prosecution. Their social connections were severed, as association with their legal problems became too dangerous for anyone seeking to maintain their own reputation and opportunities. The respect they'd cultivated through their professional position was replaced by notoriety that made their name synonymous with betrayal of public trust. Their family relationships were destroyed by revelations that extended beyond professional misconduct into personal deceptions that eliminated any foundation for future trust or reconciliation. But most significantly, their entire identity was obliterated. The person they'd pretended to be was revealed to be completely fictional, while the person they actually were was someone no one could respect or trust or support. While their artificial world collapsed, your authentic existence began expanding into spaces that had been blocked by their interference. The opportunities they'd prevented from reaching you were now flowing freely, unobstructed by their eliminated influence. The professional networks they'd poisoned against you were now actively seeking to repair relationships they realized had been damaged through manipulation and lies. Your reputation, which had been under attack, was being restored not just to its previous level, but elevated by the contrast with the exposed deception of your attackers. The resources they diverted away from you through their influence were now being redirected back to you, often multiplied because the sources had learned how their previous decisions had been influenced by someone with ulterior motives, who was now completely discredited. The social connections they'd interfered with were being re-established, often stronger than before, because the people involved now understood they'd been manipulated into distancing themselves from someone who represented exactly the authenticity and integrity they valued. But your elevation went beyond recovering what had been taken. The universe was providing access to opportunities that exceeded anything you'd lost, connections that surpassed any that had been severed, resources that multiplied anything that had been diverted. Your protection as a chosen one wasn't just defensive, it was transformational. The attack against you had triggered a cosmic response that not only eliminated the threat, but elevated you to a level of spiritual authority and material opportunity that your former enemies could never reach through artificial means. But the investigation triggered by their operation against you revealed something far more sinister than individual corruption. It exposed an entire underground economy built on targeting chosen ones specifically. Your opposition wasn't acting alone, or even originally. They were part of a systematic operation that identified spiritually gifted individuals and orchestrated campaigns designed to harvest their energy, steal their opportunities, and redirect their divine assignments to artificial channels. The government position they'd abused wasn't randomly selected, it was specifically sought because it provided access to databases that could identify people with unusual spiritual gifts, unexplained success patterns, or cosmic protection signatures that marked them as chosen ones. Their entire career path had been engineered to gain access to information that could be used to target divine assignments before they fully activated. The romantic relationship that provided their cover wasn't just personal deception, It was part of a larger network that used intimate partnerships to get close to chosen ones, study their spiritual practices, and create emotional disruption during critical phases of their divine missions. The unknowing partner had been selected not for compatibility, but for their proximity to circles where chosen ones operated. The recruited accomplices weren't random volunteers, they were specifically chosen from pools of people who had failed to activate their own spiritual gifts and harbored resentment toward those who had successfully connected with divine purpose. Their participation was motivated not just by promised rewards, but by the psychological satisfaction of undermining what they couldn't achieve themselves. This systematic targeting of chosen ones represented a spiritual warfare operation that extended far beyond individual vendetta into organized interference with cosmic order itself. The investigation revealed training materials, operational manuals, and coordination systems that had been used to target multiple chosen ones across different regions, suggesting a level of organization that required resources and planning far beyond what any individual could coordinate. The financial networks funding these operations traced back to sources that had been systematically redirecting resources meant for divine missions toward artificial purposes for decades. Money that should have flowed to chosen ones through legitimate channels was being intercepted, laundered, and used to fund campaigns against the very people it was meant to support. But here's where the cosmic response became truly extraordinary. By targeting you, they had inadvertently exposed the entire network to spiritual forces that began systematically dismantling not just their individual operation, but the larger system they represented. Your divine protection didn't just defend you, it activated a cosmic audit of everything connected to the conspiracy against chosen ones. Intelligence agencies that had been puzzled by unexplained patterns in financial flows, communication networks, and personnel movements suddenly found themselves with access to evidence that revealed the spiritual warfare dimension they'd never recognized. What they'd been tracking as potential terrorism or organized crime was actually systematic interference with divine order that threatened the spiritual evolution of entire populations. The exposure of this larger conspiracy meant that your individual attackers weren't just facing personal consequences, they were being prosecuted as part of a much larger operation that carried sentences reflecting the magnitude of their interference with cosmic purpose. Their individual crimes were now being understood as components of a systematic attack on divine order itself. The complete destruction of someone who targeted a chosen one serves as education for anyone else who might consider similar attacks in the future. The universe's response wasn't just justice, it was demonstration of what happens when anyone attempts to interfere with divine purpose through deception, manipulation, and abuse of authority. Their exposure eliminated any possibility that their destruction could be attributed to coincidence, bad luck, or normal consequences of risky behavior. The precision of their unraveling, the timing of each revelation, the interconnection of seemingly separate investigations, all pointed to coordination that transcended human planning. Anyone observing their complete destruction would understand that targeting chosen ones activates protection that operates beyond earthly systems of justice and consequence. The lesson being taught was that some people are protected by forces that cannot be manipulated, deceived, or overcome through conventional means. But the lesson extended beyond protection to demonstrate the elevation that follows successful defense of cosmic purpose. Your rise wasn't just recovery. It was transformation into someone operating with enhanced spiritual authority and expanded material resources, specifically because you'd maintained authenticity while under attack from artificial opposition. The dangerous game they played with you was actually a cosmic test they were destined to fail, while you passed simply by remaining true to your authentic nature, under pressure designed to force you into reactive deception. What makes this cosmic correction even more profound is how it's affecting bloodlines and family legacies connected to your attackers. Children who were being groomed to continue these spiritual warfare operations are now being removed from environments that would have corrupted their own divine potential. Generational curses that had been operating through family lines involved in targeting chosen ones are being broken permanently. The family members who enabled or ignored the conspiracy are discovering that their silent complicity carried consequences that extend beyond their individual choices. Spouses who looked the other way while resources were diverted from divine purposes are losing access to wealth they never questioned the source of. Parents who raised children to participate in these operations are watching their legacies crumble as the truth about their life's work becomes undeniable. But simultaneously, your own family line is experiencing unprecedented breakthrough. Generational blocks that had limited your bloodline's access to spiritual authority and material resources are being permanently removed. The cosmic protection activated by their attack on you is flowing backward and forward through your family timeline, correcting injustices and opening pathways that had been sealed for generations. The convergence of operations that created their perfect storm have now resolved into your perfect foundation for the next phase of your mission as a chosen one. Their professional destruction has created space for your professional elevation. Their relationship collapse has cleared energetic interference with your authentic connections. Their network betrayal has eliminated obstacles to your genuine alliances. The respect they commanded through false images is now being earned by you through demonstrated integrity that has been tested under the most challenging circumstances and proven unshakable. But most importantly, their exposure has revealed the cosmic forces protecting your mission, arming you with knowledge of your own spiritual authority and the universe's commitment to your success. You now know that targeting you doesn't just risk normal consequences, it activates supernatural protection that systematically destroys anything artificial while elevating everything authentic. The game they thought they were playing had rules they never understood, opponents they never saw, and consequences they never imagined. By targeting you, they activated their own destruction, while simultaneously triggering your elevation to a level of spiritual and material authority they could never reach. The whispers in underground networks that opened this revelation are now confirming that someone learned what happens when artificial power challenges authentic purpose. The empire that crumbled wasn't brought down by human enemies, it was systematically dismantled by cosmic forces protecting someone selected for divine mission. The dangerous game is over. They lost everything. You gained more than everything. The universe has spoken. Chosen ones are untouchable, and anyone who forgets this lesson will be reminded through complete destruction of everything they built through deception, while watching everything they attacked through jealousy rise to heights they could never imagine reaching themselves. Welcome to your new level of cosmic authority, armed with the knowledge that the universe will obliterate anything that threatens your mission and elevate you beyond anything that was ever stolen from you. The game is over. You won by being exactly who you were created to be.